Welcome everyone, Christine here with my DLC tier list for Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires, because there is a fairly major sale going on right now. So I'm making this particular list to give people some idea on which DLCs I think are worth it and which DLCs people shouldn't bother with. Now, the value proposition is always a tricky thing, but the way I personally see it, you gotta ask yourself this. Which DLC has campaigns that are worth playing? Which DLCs has good legendary lords in terms of their lord effects, their special skill line? Which DLCs have good units, good lords, generic lords, good heroes, regiments renown? All of these kind of things. Now, I'm not rating these DLCs just based on how great they are. I'm rating them based on price. I'm rating them based on like the value, if you will. Because you might have a DLC that in isolation could be great, but there is another DLC for that same race that just is a better value proposition from multiple perspectives. So anyway, starting with Call of the Beastmen, I'm going to put it in the F tier. The only reason you would get this DLC is if you're really interested in having the other legendary lords, except for Tarax, of the Beastmen. Like, you can get access to the entire Beastmen race roster by buying Tarax. In fact, buying Tarax is better because you get access to extra regiments renown, extra units, and Tarax himself has unique mechanics that the other Beastmen legendary lords don't have. It's also more expensive to purchase this race pack, because race packs are generally more expensive. It is more expensive to purchase this race pack than it is to just buy Tarax's DLC. So the value proposition isn't particularly great. If the legendary lords of the Beastmen were to be updated, like Khazrak, Malagor, Mogr, that would be a bit of a different situation. But as it currently stands, they don't have really any unique mechanics, whereas Tarax does have unique mechanics. So value proposition, not particularly great. I'm not saying these guys are horrible to play, they aren't. But given the fact that you can access the race through another DLC that's cheaper, and that DLC has a better campaign in terms of its mechanics, and not necessarily starting position, but just the mechanics of it, I couldn't recommend it. The only reason you really would want to get this is to just get the campaigns, and also to have the ability of confederating the legendary lords when you are playing Tarax. But it is a very low value proposition from my perspective. Then we get the Champions of Chaos DLC. Now, this DLC, it's kind of a mixed bag to talk about it, because everyone has access to Warriors of Chaos for Be'lakor. So if you're playing Immortal Empires, you get Be'lakor. And Be'lakor is by far and away the best legendary lord of the Warriors of Chaos. You get the gifts of all the Chaos gods, but you do want to own this DLC for a variety of units. Even if it is recolors, they do serve different purposes, so that is important. On top of that, Be'lakor and Archaon can also forcefully confederate the other legendary lords of the Warriors of Chaos. So if you want greater variety with legendary lords in your campaign, even playing as Be'lakor or Archaon, you would want to get the Champions of Chaos. However, I don't really think it's a strong DLC. I don't think Azazel's campaign is particularly great. I think Sigvald actually plays better as the Slaaneshi legendary lord, because you have the Slaaneshi roster, but you also have the Undivided roster as well with Sigvald. Village kind of suffers from his starting position and various issues with Sinch that inherently crop up. Festus and Valkia can be really fun campaigns, but again, I personally think Be'lakor is just a really good campaign, and you can get Valkia and Festus if you do own this DLC when playing as Be'lakor. So view it from a proposition of benefiting your roster as opposed to necessarily the campaigns themselves. That's my perspective. If Be'lakor wasn't available for free, I would probably rate this higher. But again, he is available. So you gotta ask yourself, is it really worth spending a lot of the money on this? Keeping in mind that this DLC is where the prices started going up. Is a questionable decision. A not so questionable decision is with regards to the Forge of the Chaos Dwarfs. I wish I could put it in great or mandatory, but here's the thing. beyond the price discussion, I think Chaos Dwarves, while they are a great race, well-designed, unique mechanics, interesting campaigns, they kind of suffer because the meta of Warhammer 3 right now is really focused on the first 30 turns. Basically, campaigns are over. And I think Chaos Dwarves in particular, they build on more slowly. Now, that in isolation doesn't sound too bad, but from a practical standpoint, a lot of the fun stuff that Chaos Dwarves have is locked away behind many more turns. So I think that is a downside. Great for the old world mod though. Very different discussion. But I'm not counting mods for the purposes of this video. I'm just counting the vanilla experience. So I will mention old world in particular because you can play that vanilla, just different map. But still, I think given the meta of the very fast-paced campaigns, if CA were to change that, they would be higher. But yeah, there's certainly some issues in regards to that. It's a combination of price, current meta, and also Zaytan's campaign is not necessarily that great to play. Drasov and Astrogov are substantially better, Drasov in particular. But, you know, I just don't feel I can rate it higher. Some people will disagree with this. May consider it mandatory. For what it is worth, it does have a lot of fun stuff in it, but still. Then we get to the Chaos Warriors. It's just lower than Champions of Chaos. Like, Champions of Chaos at least gives you a lot of extra roster benefits, though it should be pointed out, Sigvald, Kolic, and Archeon each have great campaign mechanics. Not necessarily the most unique ones, not necessarily in depth, but they do play differently. Archeon's really focused on a long campaign, which is a problem. Like, Be'lakor, I think, is, from a practical standpoint, a much better campaign. Like, I think Be'lakor is more of an Everchosen than Archeon is, really. I'm not joking. Like, burn the world to the ground when it actually matters and is a challenge, that's Be'lakor. At the same time, you do get access to Forceful Confederation. If you're playing Be'lakor, you do get access to Archeon, who can do the same thing. It has a lot of late-game potential. And I think Sigvald is a better campaign than Azazel for a Silencia-focused character. So that's where I'm standing on that particular subject. But not really necessarily worth the price. Grim and the Grave. I would consider it worthless. But here's the thing. There are genuine benefits to owning this DLC. Volkmar and Gorst have horrible campaigns. For Volkmar, given all the benefits the Empire has gotten recently, you'd think he'd have a great campaign, but the Books of Nagash is a crap system. That will affect the Tomb Kings on this list. Just doesn't work well as a system. Volkmar does need... Volkmar and the Tomb Kings in general, just the entire system of the Books of Nagash does need to be overhauled. In Gorst, he's strong, he works, vampire counts work very well as race, but he is boring as dirt. Now, in terms of Regiments Renown units, this is the only DLC for vampire counts. So Regiments Renown are tied to it. Various units are tied to it. Mortis engines, corpse cards. For the Empire, you do get Knights of the Blazing Sun, which are actually a pretty solid cavalry unit. Like, I personally like using them. But it's just like that, a couple of units. The campaigns aren't worth it. The Legendary Lords could be worth it, but the problem is they're so far apart from the other Legendary Lords within that same race, that really doesn't really work out. Like, yes, you can confederate them as Karl Franz in particular, you can confederate Volkmar. Or you could get Gorst as Vlad or Manfred. You could do that. But they're pretty isolated. So even from a confederation standpoint, it doesn't necessarily work out from at least a practical campaign experience. Just a handful of units. Arch-Lectors, pretty solid, though I personally prefer using Empire Generals or Master Engineers with Thrones of Decay. There's a reason this DLC was rated very low by the community when there was a Reddit poll on the subject of DLC, and I do agree with that particular sentiment. Hunter and the Beast. Now, prior to the release of Thrones of Decay, I would have considered this DLC mandatory if you're looking to have a playable Empire experience, because archers and huntsmen were essential units. But between various improvements to range combat in general, in particular how gunpowder units work, and also the fact that mods have cropped up that do also improve that even further, funnily enough, I think that if you're playing an Empire campaign, going with handgunners, even if you don't own Fronts of Decay, just going with handgunners is the better choice at the moment. And if you do own Fronts of Decay, I gotta tell you, before Fronts of Decay, I would recruit Huntsmen. I never recruit Huntsmen in general. So, like, the units, not worth it. The Regiment's Renown, obviously Regiment's Renown are always valuable. For both Lizardmen and Empire in this case. But both Nakai and Marcus Wolfhard don't have great campaigns. And in particular with Marcus Wolfhard, his system is outdated. For the Lizardmen are not in a good spot as a race. That's the first point. Out of Lizardmen DLC, there is a better value proposition. A much better value proposition from my perspective. A significantly better value proposition. So this one is bad. Not quite worthless. There's some useful things over here. Not like the beastmen, because with the beastmen race pack, you're not getting anything except the legendary lords that you wouldn't get otherwise through Taurex's DLC. Whereas you do get stuff exclusive to this. King and the Warlord, let's consider this from a dwarf perspective and a greenskin perspective. From a dwarf perspective, Belegar is not worth playing as a campaign, nor is Skarsnik for the Greenskins, by the way. Neither of these campaigns is worth playing. They're both very outdated. There were Warhammer 1 campaigns that haven't really been changed that much. The races have certainly been changed, but the fundamental mechanics, faction mechanics, haven't really changed since Warhammer 1, and it is a problem for both of them. In terms of the dwarves, though, Belegar is absolutely worth confederating. And since you can guarantee confederation regardless of distance as dwarves, this is significant. On the flip side, you don't necessarily have a lot of things that are useful, but the things that are useful in this DLC are exceptionally useful. Nasty Skulkers for greenskins and for dwarves rune lords. Both very useful units. Or if you want the diversity of playstyle, you get rangers. So there are useful things. Yes, ball throwers are a meme and a joke and all that kind of stuff. Ultimately, though, like, there's some really useful things, and Belegar is absolutely worth confederating. So I think it's just going to be weak. It's kind of like on the same level of Champions of Castle. Like, there are useful things to add flavor to that give you genuine strength in your army, which, by the way, so does Champions of Castle. Like, Warriors of Chaos and Chosen of Nurgle are the best infantry, or some of the best infantry units in the freaking game. It's kind of a similar situation over here as well, I would argue. Norsca, worthless. Moving on. Or not. Norsca is a Warhammer 1 race. It's never really been properly updated. It has horrible campaigns, horrible unit roster, horrible mechanics, broken mechanics. I could go on. I've talked about Norsca a lot. CA is looking to update that, but as it currently stands, Norsca is not fucking worth playing. It's completely broken. It doesn't have the unit roster it needs, doesn't have the hero roster. The one lord choice you have is genuinely the worst lord choice in the entire game. Like, yeah, don't spend your money on Norsca. Because that's the thing, you gotta ask yourself. Like, if you had unlimited money, yeah, buy all of them. But if you're looking to, buy one DLC or another and you're making those kind of decisions, this is the last DLC you'd probably want to own. Like, even worse than Beastmen. Then we have Ogres. I think Ogres are also worthless. Certainly in their current incarnation. Now you might say, well, they're gonna get a rework, right? Yes, but if they are getting a rework, consider this. Greases and Scrag don't have great campaigns as they currently are. If they get overhauled, might be... If you want to take that chance, that with the Omens of Destruction DLC, they do vastly improve the Greases and Scrag campaigns, you may want to buy this DLC, keeping in mind the sale ends before we even get those kind of details. I'm sure there's going to be some trailers and all that. But I can tell you this as a content creator. Personally, I won't be able to show you that kind of information. I don't think anyone will. Or they might be able to on the day the sale ends. So if you want to go for that coin flip, and it's not really a coin flip, you might want to buy them, but you're not really getting anything here except the legendary lords, which aren't great. You're not getting anything here in terms of roster that you won't get through purchasing Maneater. That would be my perspective on that. Then we have the Prophet and the Warlock. From the perspective of a lot of people in the community, Prophet and Warlock is a mandatory DLC. I'm going to say it is not. You can't ignore the fact that half of this DLC is worthless, and the Lizardmen are worthless. Tenwin does not have a good campaign. Yes, I know he's powerful. I know he's broken. The problem is he breaks the game. He breaks the AI of all Lizardmen factions and all Skaven factions because of the global war he starts. And I've played this campaign. I can tell you, it doesn't work well on the campaign map. It just completely breaks the game and the way the AI behaves. So that's kind of a problem. Yes, regiments, renown, units, all that, sure. But Lizardmen, bad race. So the entire Lizardmen aspect, like, half the DLC is worthless. What about the other half? Well, I could still consider this great, or for Skaven even mandatory, but here's the problem. Skaven Blight is not a great starting position. Ikaclaw is an amazing legendary lord. He has great faction mechanics. He has unique faction mechanics. He has really interesting and fun stuff that works. He has very powerful units like Rattling Gunners and Giselles just add so much flavor. And they work far better at the moment than they ever have before in Warhammer 3. But his starting position, pretty miserable. And I want to specify this. For me, what matters a lot is replayability. And I think we can all agree, a lot of us can agree, that as much as we can enjoy Ikaclaw's campaign to a certain extent, that start is a miserable experience. Like, if you're just looking to play it once, sure, endure it, and then get to the fun stuff. But replayability is just not particularly great, because you're always going to have to deal with that miserable start. Having a good campaign start is quite important to, playing a campaign over and over and over again. And I just don't think Ikaclaw has it. Could say that for the Old World mod, it is an amazing experience, because that Skaven Blight in Old World, holy shit, is that freaking amazing. But that's a mod. Just worth pointing out, because we do have that map. It is available. It works. It's a great map in a lot of ways. Worth saying it. But I just can't really rate it higher considering the Lizardman aspect. Otherwise, I'd put it in at least great. Or even mandatory. Queen and the Crone. This one is tricky. Alariel and Helebron don't necessarily have the best campaigns in the game. Alariel's campaign mechanic, Defender of Ulthuan, is actually broken. I find a lot of bugs with it. On the flip side, she does give you the best hero in the game in far more plentiful quantities in Handmaidens. Like, Handmaidens make High Elf campaigns so much better. Sisters of Avalorn as a high-end unit. Alariel works. And if you're playing any other High Elf campaign, you're probably going to focus on Ulthuan. You won't be able to unify Ulthuan unless you have this DLC, because you can't confederate if you don't own the DLC a lord is part of. And so that is important for High Elves. Helebron, kind of relevant for the Dark Elves, I'm not going to lie. And it's okay as a mechanic, but let's just put it like this. This DLC is despised by a lot of people in the community for a reason. Though I think a lot of people are far more harsh towards Dark Elves than they should be. But I certainly don't think Helebron has a great campaign necessarily. Like, I vastly prefer Morathi or Lokir or even Malekith versus Helebron. And if I'm playing a High Elf campaign, there are some great campaigns. Alariel works. It can also be tedious at the same time. So it's just kind of weak. You could make an argument for it being okay in terms of the High Elf and stuff. Like, for High Elf stuff, just because of Handmaidens and Sisters, yeah, it's okay. For Dark Elves, it's kind of pointless. There's nothing that this DLC adds for Dark Elves they really need, except the ability of confederating Helebron. Now, Shadow and Blade, this is a great DLC. Let me explain this. Malice Darkblade does not have a very interesting campaign. He is powerful, he does have unique mechanics, but I think he's one of the least played campaigns in the game. He's just pretty dull. I do certainly think he needs some kind of update to make him more interesting. But the Dark Elf stuff does offer some interesting stuff. Yes, Medusae are not essential units, but it's variety. Importantly, however, you get Masters as a hero. And Masters are very plentiful, very easy to acquire, and give you a decent amount of power. Shouldn't be ignored. But really, the winner here is the Skaven stuff. Snitch has unique campaign mechanics, like Claw. Like, all the Skaven DLCs have unique mechanics. They're all great from that point of view. But crucially, Snitch has a great campaign start. Not just in the province he starts, but in the sheer variety of the campaign. Because Cafe is a great zone, really. Like, if you're someone starting Warhammer free, playing a campaign as Snitch or Lokir and Cafe would be a good place to start. I'm not joking on this. Like, just the Skaven inherently have so much potential, really, in their campaigns. And I think Snitch has a lot of value as a legendary lord. Like, I understand a lot of people love Claw, but I honestly think Snitch has the best Skaven campaign in the game, from both a practical standpoint and theoretical. Really, just a lot of things on offer in that campaign. Useful units as well. Like, you get incredibly powerful range units, you get wall breaker infantry. There's really good stuff over here for the Skaven. Like, this DLC, by the way, kind of marked the turning point for Creative Assembly in terms of quality and how much it went up. It wasn't quite there yet with Malice Darkblade, though people speculate that they wanted to make Rakarth the DLC Lord, but then they decided, okay, let's make Malice Darkblade because he's more popular as a character. Shadows of Change, mandatory, absolutely important. No, worthless. Let me put it like this. Every single race that's part of this DLC is not particularly great to play. Cafe is playable, it works, it has a great unit roster, unit variety, but it's dull as dirt. Like, Cafe, like, playing Cafe in Cafe, like, you conquer Cafe and then you've got nothing else in the campaign. Even as Jan Bo. And Jungle Warfare is horrible as well. Jungle Warfare is not fucking fun. So, and keep in mind, I mentioned Cafe for a reason first, because Cafe actually is the best part of this DLC. Some interesting units, hero, all that. Could have used a replenishment hero, but whatever. Siege is not great. The Changeling is easily one of the worst campaigns in the game. It's not that he's weak, it's just dull as dirt. Also buggy. Astankia, not great. Kislev needs an update. And so does Astankia, by the way, need an update. So, beyond all the controversy, ignoring that, beyond all the controversy, Siege is not worth playing. From my point of view. Like, you'll have a better time. Like, you might benefit more playing Warriors of Chaos than you would Siege if you own this DLC. Because there's some stuff that you get as Warriors of Chaos that's part of this DLC. That's kind of sad with regards to Siege. Is it worth paying the price for it? No. Hell no. Kislev stuff, yeah, there's some interesting stuff, absolutely, but Kislev is not a great race. If you're looking for a human faction, like, I would strongly recommend Cafe 100 times more than Kislev. And I've played Kislev a lot, but is enduring playing Kislev. So Kislev needs an update. CA does acknowledge this. I think if Cafe gets updated, if Kislev gets updated, this DLC would be much higher value, but really the Changeling campaign would still suck, so it would still not be a very high tier DLC. Like, this is the problem with SOC. Like, it's a lack of racial reworks, it's the price, it's a lot of things combined in this particular DLC. CA was trying to see how far they could get away with price gouging over here with this one. The Silence and the Fury, mandatory. So, Silence and the Fury is easily one of the best value DLCs in the game. Probably the highest value. You get access to an entire beastmen roster by just owning this DLC. Except the Legendary Lords. But units, regiments of renown, extra units that are only available for this DLC. The best beastmen campaign, at least the most unique one in terms of mechanics, is in this DLC. On top of that, for the Lizardmen, this is the best campaign by far for the Lizardmen. Oxyatl, if the Lizardmen as a race is like D or F tier, and I've done polls on this, it's not just my opinion, a lot of people agree with this. If the Lizardmen are a D or F tier race, Oxyatl is an S tier Legendary Lord. He has very fun, interesting mechanics. The only downside really is that playing his campaign, your campaign performance FPS will tank because of his sanctums. But the mechanics work. Like, a lot of issues that Lizardmen have, he kind of works with it. I mean, you still have those issues, but he kind of flat out ignores a lot of problems. He has all the climate options in the game that adds so much variety. It's a great campaign in terms of variety. Superb DLC from a value proposition. Also, fairly low price as well. This is cheaper than many other DLCs. Like, this Lord pack is great value, and it's higher value. It's more value than a lot of race packs in the game. Or probably all the race packs in the game. Thrones Decay, S tier. Like, I know Thrones Decay doesn't have the same discount as the others. I'm well aware of that. But let me be as blunt as possible. Ignoring the racial reworks, ignoring what they did for Karl Franz, ignoring what they did for Gelt, consider this DLC in isolation. And even compared to other DLCs, this DLC adds so much to every single race that's part of it. Adds different playstyles, like Slayers are more viable. Flying units are more viable for the dwarfs. For Nurgle, you get more monsters, so more viable. You get more heroes, more viable, more variety, better mechanics. And for the Empire, while you do have gunpowder units, you still have handgunners by default. Having the equivalent of human Jezzails and land ships, again, more variety. And a new knight unit. And one of the best lore choices for the Empire as well. So master engineers, regular engineers, campaign mobility, artillery power, range power. There's a lot here. And every single campaign, or rather, Malachi is the best campaign in the game right now. Maneater might take that spot when Omens of Destruction comes out, or maybe Ironclaw will. We'll see. Maybe both of them. But Malachi has a great campaign. Really fun campaign. Great deal of variety. But it's not just that. This DLC, like if you're playing any of these races, Nurgle, Empire, Dwarves, this DLC is mandatory because it adds so much. Just from the benefits you'll get from units, regiments, renown, lord, hero choices, this is superb. They really hit it with this particular DLC. And they had to after the disasters they went through. Worked out quite well. I really consider this DLC the best DLC that Creative Assembly has ever made. Still expensive, but great value proposition. I dislike Nurgle. I like Nurgle the least, rather. But Tamarkan also has the best Nurgle campaign in the game. So it's better than Festus in quite a few ways. At least from an army perspective, though Festus does have better plagues. But that's not Tamarkan's focus. There's a lot of things to like about this DLC. And I think it's the one DLC I've spent the most amount of hours in Warhammer 3. Even more than Forge of the Chaos Dwarves. And I played a lot of Forge of the Chaos Dwarves when that came out. Moving on. We get the Tomb Kings. Yeah, worthless. Tomb Kings don't work. They're outdated. A lot of their campaigns are broken. A lot of their mechanics are broken. Tomb Kings have miserable campaign starts, except Tarkan, who has a pathetically easy campaign start. And then once you get to a point, you're just steamrolling the map with no opposition. Because you recruit units for free, your lords start as Immortal. The only thing you're risking are your heroes, if even that. Assuming they don't have Immortal. And the books on the Gash are just so very tedious to deal with. So I really can't recommend the Tomb Kings. I've played them quite a bit. I understand a lot of people have a high opinion of them. Back in Warhammer 2, perfectly understandable. But this is not Warhammer 2. It's Warhammer 3. Things work differently, and I think Tomb Kings just haven't aged all that well. In a lot of ways. Then we have Twisted and Twilight. Twisted and Twilight is a great DLC. Not quite mandatory. And the reason I say that, the reason I don't think this DLC is quite mandatory is because I don't think Wood Elves are a particularly fun race to play right now. Though, to be fair, unlike the Wood Elf race pack, you get X and even Tarx's DLC, You do get access to Orion and Durfu through Confederation here. Keep in mind there's some issues if you don't own the Wood Elf race pack, in the sense that, yes, you can confederate them and get them and their skill lines, but if you lose them in battle, you won't be able to get them back again if you don't own the Wood Elf race pack. But still, that's a pretty damn good deal. Like, you get control of the entire Wood Elf roster. If you don't own Warhammer 2, you can just buy the DLC, get access to Skaven. Front may not have the best Skaven campaign, but he does certainly have some very fun mechanics as well. Sisters have a flying cruise missile army, which is a different playstyle than just what you regularly deal with in Wood Elf campaigns. Because in Orion's campaign, Durfur's campaign, Draga's campaign, you focus on land-based ranged infantry, and you focus on melee infantry or monstrous infantry, Treekin. In the Sisters, you can do those things, but you also have Hawk Riders with cruise missiles on them. That is a substantial aspect. And the entire roster of Wood Elves is available, plus Regiments Renown that are only available for this DLC, like just great value all around. Front, again, may not have the best campaign. Like, the reason I'm not putting this in mandatory is I don't really think that Wood Elves work particularly well. So it's hard to put something in mandatory when it's just such a, end turn button simulator type situation. Then we have Curse of the Vampire Coast, worthless. I've talked a lot about Vampire Coast. They don't work well right now. Don't spend your money on it. I regret I did. I purchased a lot of DLCs myself. In fact, I purchased every Warhammer 1 and Warhammer 2 DLC on my own. And I gotta tell you, this is the one I regret I spent my money on, which is not something I would say easily. The Vampire Coast really works horribly in Warhammer 3. People may have fond memories because of Warhammer 2. Ain't working in Warhammer 3. They really, really need an update. And maybe because one of the persons who's handling the free updates that improve races is the guy who played a significant role in Vampire Coast, maybe we will get those improvements. But at this current stage, it's literally throwing your money away. Like, genuinely the worst DLC you could buy. Like, say what you will about Tomb Kings. They're not particularly great, but they do work. They're very strong in a lot of ways. Vampire Coast is weak, pathetic, bad mechanics, bad economy, bad systems, completely outdated race design. Yeah, it just doesn't work. Warden and the Paunch. It's an okay DLC. You do get a replenishment hero for the greenskins. You get Stone Trolls. Very useful units. Grom, great character, great mechanics. Not the great starting position. But still, you can play that campaign. It's fun conquering Wolf One as the greenskins. That you may not have much to do after that. That is a problem. But still, you can't deny that Grom is quite an interesting character. And so is Elfarian. I do think both of them could use some updates, like Climate for Grom, and Elfarian could have some better ways. Just High Elves need an update in general, but there's a reason why this DLC is well regarded. I think it was more impactful back in Warhammer 2, but look, this is good value DLC. Not great, not mandatory, but still a good value DLC from my perspective. And then we have Realm the Wood Elves. Yeah, I do consider it worthless. The only reason you really want this DLC is to play Draga's campaign. Yes, it's fun. Yes, it's interesting. Yes, it's special. But outside of that, there's very little reason to buy this pack. If you want to play Wood Elves, if you want to get Orion, if you want to get Durfu, sure, you may not have their faction effects, the Wild Hunt, the Wall Breaker ability or Durfu has. Sure. You do need to own this race pack, and it might cause issues if you don't, but at the same time, when Twist and Twilight exists, it's kind of a waste of money to buy this race pack when you get a much better value proposition through Twist and Twilight. All the units this one contains, just not all the Legendary Lords. Like, you're only really going to miss out on Draca if you don't own this. So it's a really hard sell from my perspective over here. Like, if I were to just list these, what's worse, Norsca or Vampire Coast? Norsca can at least somewhat work, but still, like, this would probably be the way I would list them in terms of like value proposition. Yeah, like that. And that is my perspective on which DLCs I think are worth buying versus others. If you have a limited budget, if you're trying to think, okay, what's worth it, what's not, this is where I personally would stand on. So mandatory grade, okay. Like everything that's above weak, so everything, so S, A, and B tiers, those are all DLCs worth purchasing. Everything below that, you might get some value proposition from C and D. You're getting very, very little from F. That would be my perspective. Christine signing out. Stay tuned for more.